Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined, they're real. When a man walks into a police station claiming his wife of 30 years is gone without a trace, most towns would rally to help. But in Dothan, Alabama, what came next would unravel a marriage, a town's trust, and a silence deadly enough to bury the truth 6 feet deep. On February 24th, 2025, at approximately 8:12 a.m., Stephen Craig Miller Sr. entered the Dothan Police Department. Dressed plainly, his demeanor subdued. He told the officer at the front desk that his wife, Gloria Miller, hadn't come home since the evening of the 22nd. She had, according to him, just walked out. No luggage, no phone, no explanation. And 2 days had passed. The report was logged as a voluntary adult missing case, standard procedure in Alabama if no foul play is evident and no immediate threats are recorded. But the circumstances were noted as unusual. Gloria's age, 57, her consistent behavior patterns, and the length of time since last contact raised red flags. She wasn't the type to disappear. Officers arrived at the couple's residence on Halls Mill Road by mid-morning. The house was quiet, not in disarray, no signs of forced entry or struggle. Gloria's personal items, her handbag, cell phone, and keys, were found neatly placed on the kitchen counter. Her car was still in the driveway. The master bedroom was made, her slippers were beside the bed. For seasoned investigators, details like those meant something. People who choose to leave don't typically leave behind their means of communication, identification, or transportation. One of the first officers on the scene, Detective Jason Carver, later noted in his field report, the scene lacked urgency, nothing out of place, no visible distress. It was the kind of calm that makes your skin crawl. Stephen appeared cooperative. He allowed officers to enter the home without hesitation, even offering them coffee. He repeated his statement. Gloria had seemed upset about some family tension, but hadn't said much. She'd gone to bed early on the 22nd. When he woke up, she was gone, but nothing in the timeline added up. Phone logs showed Gloria hadn't made or received any calls or messages since 8:14 p.m. on February 22nd. That message, a short text to a friend about picking up groceries the next morning, was the last digital trace of her activity. The phone hadn't left the house since. No transactions had been made on her credit or debit cards, no toll records, no hospital admissions, no eyewitnesses, and no exit footage on neighborhood surveillance cameras. If she had left, she hadn't done so by foot, car, or bus, at least not in any documented way. Still, in the absence of physical evidence, protocol remained cautious. A missing person bulletin went out by late afternoon. A brief press alert was drafted with Stephen's consent, and he agreed to appear on local television to ask for help. The press conference was scheduled for the following day. Meanwhile, Dayton Carver quietly opened a parallel track, backgrounding the couple's marriage, digging into past incidents, if any, of domestic conflict, and reviewing publicly available data on the family. There were no immediate criminal flags on Stephen, but something gnawed at the edges. Gloria was described by neighbors as quiet, kind, always gardening. Several friends used the same words: routine, reserved, dependable. She had lived in Dothan her entire adult life. She was a churchgoer, involved in occasional charity work, and had never once disappeared. One neighbor, Angela Farris, commented off record, "She wasn't the flighty type. If Gloria left, she'd leave a note, or at least take her purse." What disturbed investigators most wasn't the absence of evidence. It was how clean everything seemed. Too clean, like someone had anticipated what should be found and what shouldn't. Back at HQ, forensic techs began data pulls on household devices. The smart thermostat showed no movement between 11:03 p.m. on February 22nd and 5:40 a.m. on the 23rd. No one opened the fridge. No one flushed a toilet. No lights turned on. But the garage door registered an open-close event at 4:12 a.m. No corresponding motion inside the house. No sound detection on smart home monitors. That was the first anomaly. Still, Detective Carver hesitated to act. He needed more. A movement log, GPS ping, a pattern, something to justify treating this as a possible crime scene. He requested a digital trace from Stephen's cell carrier and onboard truck system. standard in newer F-150s. The request was logged. Processing ETA. 48 hours. Until then, all they had was absence. No body, no struggle, no suspect, just silence. And in homicide work, silence is rarely neutral. Gloria Whitaker Miller was born and raised in Houston County. She spent most of her adult life within a 20-mile radius of Dothan, Alabama. According to records, she had been married to Stephen Craig Miller Sr. since 1993. Public documents listed them as co-owners of their Halls Mill Road residence, with no mortgage lien in the last 12 years. 2 adult children, both out of state, no recent hospital admissions, no legal proceedings active, at least not on paper. As detectives expanded the missing person inquiry, the first procedural step involved mapping a behavioral baseline. Gloria's digital footprint provided a clear routine: grocery purchases on Wednesdays, church events on weekends, daily logins to a gardening blog under the handle gmiller57. The last login? 7:58 p.m. on February 22nd. That placed her inside the house, active on her tablet, roughly 16 minutes before the final text was sent from her phone. No further device activity followed. Not on the tablet, phone, or laptop. Digital silence after 8:14 p.m. For investigators, this offered the first definitive marker. The window between 8:15 p.m. and 5:30 a.m. was critical. That's when her routine was broken. And in cases like this, when no body was yet confirmed, the absence of expected behavior became the earliest forensic anomaly. Meanwhile, detectives quietly pulled phone records from both Gloria and Stephen's service providers. Gloria's number showed no outgoing activity since the 22nd. Stephen's device, by contrast, remained active throughout the weekend. Calls to local family members, one to a neighbor, several to a private number traced back to a hardware supply store in Geneva County. That detail triggered a quiet background check. Why would a retired man whose wife had just vanished call a hardware shop in a neighboring county 2 hours before filing a report? Detectives flagged it. They didn't confront Stephen, not yet. Instead, they turned to forensic lead tech Ron Haskins, who reviewed data from the Miller residence's smart home system. The temperature readings, motion sensors, and light activation logs were all archived in the cloud. According to metadata timestamps, the last recorded motion in the master bedroom was at 11:03 p.m., but at 4:12 a.m. the garage door opened. No corresponding movement inside the hallway. The pattern was sharp, clean, almost too clean. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem, Haskins wrote in his first summary memo. A door opens without movement nearby. A garage activation without accompanying noise. A husband who wakes up to find his wife gone, but doesn't call 911 for almost 2 days. No one declared foul play, but the system had already started building a case. Beyond the home, investigators interviewed neighbors. Most had little insight. The couple kept to themselves. They didn't socialize. One neighbor said they had once seen Gloria at the mailbox looking quiet and distant, but no one reported shouting, disturbances, or visible injuries. But records from 2018 showed Gloria had filed a temporary protective order, not against Stephen, but against their daughter, Desiree Miller, after a reported family altercation involving verbal threats. The order was dropped 3 weeks later. No further action was taken. Still, it suggested long-standing tension within the family unit. Investigators requested sealed court records and psychological assessments, if any existed. Meanwhile, the forensic team traced the truck Stephen used. It was equipped with a built-in navigation unit, standard for 2022 Ford F-150s. When subpoenaed, Ford Pass data showed the vehicle left the residence at 4:16 a.m. on February 23rd and traveled southwest toward Geneva County. Total time gone, 1 hour, 41 minutes. No stops logged on gas stations or rest areas. The system lost signal briefly in a rural corridor near a dry creek bed. It wasn't enough for a warrant, but it added weight to the theory forming behind the scenes. Then came the first real forensic break. Soil samples from the truck's undercarriage, taken by crime scene investigators on February 25th, revealed sand-heavy particulate with high clay content, matching geological characteristics unique to the Geneva Basin. This wasn't typical urban debris. It was the kind of soil found in unpaved service roads and runoff zones. In isolation, it meant little. Together with the timing, it strengthened a directional link between Stephen's 4 a.m. drive and a remote area where no one in the Miller family had any known reason to go. Still, the department couldn't label the case a homicide. Without a body, no forensic confirmation of death existed. The district attorney's office advised caution. No press statements, no premature conclusions. The last thing the department wanted was a public misstep. Instead, investigators proceeded methodically. Surveillance footage was pulled from convenience stores and public roads. Toll records were verified. The family's financial activity was reviewed. No bank withdrawals, no travel bookings. Nothing suggested Gloria had run. But people don't disappear cleanly. They leave something. And the Miller house left too little. That's what made it suspicious. February 25th, 2025. Geneva County Sheriff's Office received a call at 11:38 a.m. from a local surveyor working on a rural property just outside Malvern. He had followed a faint odor drifting along a dry creek bed off Highway 103. What he found was partially buried human remains, less than 100 feet from the tree line. The shallow grave wasn't disguised. The topsoil had been hastily overturned and loosely packed. No rocks, no brush, just earth thinly covering a body. Deputies responded and secured the site immediately. Due to the condition of the remains, they contacted the Houston County Sheriff's Office and the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. A mobile forensics team was dispatched within 2 hours. Dothan PD was alerted soon after. The missing persons bulletin for Gloria Miller had only been public for 24 hours, but the description, female, Caucasian, late 50s, matched initial field observations. Photographs were taken before excavation, no shoes, clothes intact, jewelry still on, no ID present. The body was retrieved and transported to Montgomery for forensic examination. Chain of custody logs confirmed sample integrity. Preliminary on-site observations indicated no animal interference. A key forensic point confirming the location had not been exposed long. Investigators estimated burial occurred within 48 to 72 hours. The area, sparse woodland with intermittent hunting paths, matched the soil profile pulled from the undercarriage of Stephen Miller Sr.'s truck 2 days prior. The samples collected at the burial site showed nearly identical clay concentration and mineral composition. This cross-match provided investigators with the first physical link between the vehicle and the scene. At 6:40 p.m., the forensic examiner confirmed that fingerprints were unviable due to decomposition. However, dental records were requested and matched to Gloria Miller by 8:26 p.m. the same evening. Cause of death, manual strangulation. No signs of defensive wounds or sexual assault. Time of death aligned with the window identified from smart home and digital inactivity records. Roughly late evening, February 22nd to early morning, February 23rd. The discovery transformed the case from a missing person inquiry into a homicide investigation. Dothan detectives returned to the Miller residence, this time with a new lens. Under Alabama law, discovery of a body with signs of foul play qualified the home for reclassification as a potential crime scene. Consent was no longer required. Forensic investigators reprocessed the garage with luminol. No blood spatter. No chemical evidence of bleach or cleaner. However, an environmental DNA swab from the garage wall, previously overlooked, tested positive for epithelial cells belonging to Gloria Miller. The height of the transfer was consistent with a head or neck region contact point. No blood, no tissue, just contact. The garage had been wiped down, but not enough. Inside the home, nothing had changed. The house remained too quiet. That wasn't just a detail, it was a sign. Nothing in the environment reflected stress or chaos. It was sterilized normalcy. Investigators quietly updated the FBI's VICAP system with the case parameters. While not a federal matter, VICAP cross-referencing ensured any future patterns involving similar MO, domestic partners, manual strangulation, rural disposal sites, would be flagged nationwide. They also filed a formal interview request with Stephen Miller. He was not under arrest. He had voluntarily participated so far. But now the evidence was catching up with the silence. Surveillance review showed no one else entering or exiting the residence in the time frame in question. The data supported only one narrative. At this point, detectives considered requesting a search warrant for the interior of Stephen's truck, specifically the floor mats, wheel wells, and interior cabin fabric. The vehicle had not yet been detailed, and the clay-based soil from Geneva would likely still be embedded. They didn't move too fast. With no eyewitnesses and no confession, the buildup of physical evidence had to be methodical. Missteps in collection or overreach could jeopardize a future prosecution. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, while not formally involved, reviewed the preliminary file and returned one note. Victim selection is intimate. Scene disposal is functional. Risk level low. Suspect is familiar with area and methodically managed exposure. That insight shaped how the team planned next steps. There was no randomness here, no panic, no disorganized flight. This was someone who knew their timing, terrain, and tools. That narrowed the profile, and it closed in on only one potential suspect. But still, protocol ruled. The forensic case had to stand on its own, each piece layered over the next, with no room for error. Because in towns like Dothan, Alabama, murder doesn't just take a life. It fractures the community that assumed nothing like this could ever happen here. By February 26, 2025, the body had been identified, the cause of death determined, and the primary suspect quietly under surveillance. The case had moved from quiet suspicion to active homicide investigation. But while law enforcement gathered evidence behind the scenes, Stephen Craig Miller Sr. was standing in front of a camera. Local news station WDHN aired the segment during the 6:00 p.m. broadcast. Stephen, in a faded button-down and dark jeans, sat beside a family friend who coordinated the interview. He pleaded with viewers to help find Gloria. His words were straightforward, no theatrics. But that's what caught the attention of investigators, because by then, they had already confirmed her death. He hadn't been told yet. And yet, on camera, he never referred to her in the present tense. That detail triggered a rapid review of his media appearances and statements. Detectives flagged the footage and submitted it for behavioral review. One phrase in particular stood out. She was a good woman. Not is, but was. This wasn't enough for an arrest, but paired with the emerging forensic evidence, it established behavioral leakage. That term, used by criminal profilers, refers to subconscious slips where a suspect reveals more than they intend. It's rarely admissible in court, but it holds value during an ongoing investigation. Meanwhile, Dothan PD began reviewing surveillance footage from the area around the Miller residence on the night of February 22nd. A pole-mounted security camera from a neighbor 2 doors down, angled toward the street, captured a pickup truck backing out of the driveway at 4:13 a.m. The timestamp aligned precisely with smart garage data. The truck had no visible load, but the timestamp and trajectory confirmed Stephen's vehicle left the property and headed south, consistent with GPS data pulled earlier. He returned at 5:58 a.m., no detours, no stops logged, straight to and from Geneva County. It was enough for a search warrant. That afternoon, investigators impounded the vehicle and began a full forensic sweep. Dirt and debris collected from the front passenger side floor mat yielded trace elements matching the burial site. Silica-rich sand with red clay compound, not typically found in Dothan's urban zones. Fibers were also found. Gray cotton thread, consistent with clothing Gloria had been wearing when discovered. No blood, no skin. But fibers embedded in the mat reinforced the contact theory. Back at the residence, phone records confirmed that Stephen had made a call at 6:31 a.m. on February 23rd to a hardware store in Geneva County. The clerk confirmed no purchase was made, no record of a transaction, no security footage remained from that time window. The call appeared to serve no purpose. Investigators suspected the call was a post-disposal alibi attempt, designed to later explain why his phone pinged in Geneva. If questioned, he could claim he drove there for building supplies. The problem was, there was no purchase. Just a phone call and a body in a shallow grave at 12 miles from the store. At this point, detectives requested a second voluntary interview. Stephen agreed, but this time they did not focus on his wife. Instead, they asked for a walkthrough of his movements on the 23rd. He repeated the same general story. Slept poorly, noticed Gloria was gone, assumed she left to clear her head, claimed he stayed home most of the day. He didn't mention the early morning drive. That omission was documented, noted, and logged. They didn't confront him, not yet. Under Miranda protocols, an accusatory shift without sufficient cause could compromise interview admissibility. The goal was not to provoke a denial, but to establish timeline inconsistencies. Concurrently, a forensic linguist reviewed transcripts of Stevens' press statements and police interviews. Linguistic drift, the shift from first-person emotional reference to detached summary language, was observed across multiple instances. Again, not conclusive, but additive. And across all data points, GPS logs, garage door triggers, environmental DNA, and now recorded inconsistencies, the framework of the case was solidifying. What concerned investigators most wasn't the forensic data. It was how aligned it all was. The timeline, the behavior, the silence. As one senior detective wrote in his notes, "The case isn't loud. That's what makes it louder." By the morning of February 27, 2025, the investigation had reached a point of no return. Gloria Miller was dead. Her body had been found in a shallow grave, manually strangled, left beneath pine brush in Geneva County. The digital logs, forensic trace evidence, and inconsistencies in her husband's account weren't abstract theories anymore. They were structured findings, stacked, aligned, and ready for presentation to the district attorney. This was the stage in a homicide investigation where silence holds a different weight. There's no arrest yet, no press conference, no indictment, but everyone involved knows the direction the case is moving. It's not a question of if anymore. It's when. The first priority was chain of custody validation. The lab reprocessed the vehicle fibers with a second technician to confirm match accuracy. Results were consistent with initial findings. The gray thread pulled from the floor mat was chemically indistinct from the shirt Gloria was wearing at the time of discovery. Microscopic scoring on the fiber edges suggested friction contact, likely from a folded body being placed or dragged. The clay-based soil adhered to the rear wheel wells of Stevens' truck was sampled against 3 other regions of Geneva County to rule out cross-contamination. Only one location matched all 4 mineral markers, the exact location where the body had been recovered. At the same time, an internal review team combed through the search warrant execution protocols to ensure no step had been rushed or overreached. The integrity of the physical evidence would be meaningless if the process that secured it wasn't airtight. Every signature, timestamp, and log entry had to withstand scrutiny. Meanwhile, the district attorney's office began compiling the probable cause affidavit for an arrest warrant. The document detailed 3 key forensic anchors: digital behavior timeline. Smart home data showed garage activation at 4:12 a.m. on Feb 23. No other person registered on camera, motion sensor, or neighborhood footage. Geolocation trace, GPS coordinates from the suspect's truck matched travel to and from the disposal site within a 2-hour window. Physical transfer evidence, soil and fabric trace linked both the victim and burial site to the vehicle in the suspect's possession. These findings were supplemented, not led, by Stephen Miller's interview omissions and his public language use. They weren't emotional cues. They were behavioral inconsistencies used to establish investigative direction, not motive. And still, despite everything, there was no confession, no witness, no surveillance footage of the act itself. That was the hard edge of the case. It had to be carried by science and sequence. Investigators also looked again at motive. There was no large life insurance policy, no active affair, but there was something else: years of quiet control. Gloria's closest friend, who had given a statement early in the case, returned to the station voluntarily. She said Gloria had expressed concern in late January that if she ever left, he wouldn't let her. That statement, although hearsay, mirrored the profile noted by the Behavioral Analysis Unit: a partner unwilling to relinquish control, not driven by passion, but by permanence. These are the kinds of cases that don't explode. They compress. Layer after layer of routine, of image, of silence until something gives. And when it does, all that's left are timelines and trace. By evening, the affidavit was finalized. The arrest warrant was signed at 8:47 p.m. Stephen Miller was still at home. He hadn't tried to run. He hadn't lawyered up. He was still talking to police, carefully. Maybe he thought he had done enough to bury the truth. But what he couldn't control was time. And forensic science doesn't forget where someone stepped or what they touched, even if no one was looking. February 28, 2025. At 6:04 a.m., a marked unit from Houston County Sheriff's Office pulled into the driveway on Halls Mill Road. The arrest warrant for Stephen Craig Miller Sr. had been signed the night before, supported by a 23-page affidavit. It was time to act. He opened the door without resistance. No questions, no delay. He was placed in handcuffs and read his rights. No emotional outburst, no demand for a lawyer, just compliance, quiet and deliberate. What followed was procedural but precise. He was transported to the Houston County Jail, booked at 6:39 a.m. on charges of murder in the first degree under Alabama Code Paragraph 13A-62. Bond was set at $1.5 million. He was placed in a single-cell holding unit pending arraignment. The press release went out later that morning. Dothan PD confirmed the arrest and clarified that the case had transitioned into a formal homicide prosecution. They withheld the specific forensic findings but acknowledged that physical evidence had formed the core of their case. At the arraignment on March 3rd, Stephen pled not guilty. A public defender was assigned. The judge denied a bond reduction motion, citing the forensic linkage between the defendant, the vehicle, and the location of the victim's remains. Court transcripts confirmed that the defense made no challenge to the underlying forensic chain at that point. The courtroom was half full. No reporters from national outlets had arrived yet, but several local residents and two former co-workers of Gloria sat in the back row. One later stated off-record that the courtroom felt frozen. That wasn't emotion, it was restraint. Gloria Miller's funeral was held the following week. The service was closed to the public. Her remains had been quietly released from the state forensic lab in Montgomery. Only a few family members attended. The children were notably absent. Dothan, a town of under 80,000, doesn't forget cases like this. Not because of the violence, but because of how long it hid behind the appearance of normal. No one had seen the bruises. No one had called in noise complaints. No one had intervened. That's what stayed with people afterward. The realization that sometimes it doesn't look like danger. It looks like a clean garage, a tidy kitchen, a man holding a press conference asking for help. Behind the scenes, investigators continued their work. The prosecution team requested additional analysis on trace elements found on a tarp recovered from the Miller property. It wasn't central to the case, but it could help support the burial logistics timeline. Prosecutors had already begun prepping their trial theory: control-based homicide, masked as a missing person, supported by physical evidence, digital records, and deliberate deception. The goal wasn't to shock the jury, it was to present a clean case, one that stood fully on logic, trace, and sequence. There was no confession, no recorded phone call, no eyewitness. But what they had, data, soil, fibers, timing, was cohesive. And if it held, it wouldn't matter that no one heard her scream. March 2025. 3 weeks after the arrest of Stephen Craig Miller Sr., the prosecution team had moved into trial preparation mode. What followed was not dramatic, not loud, but it was decisive. The kind of methodical assembly that criminal justice systems depend on when there's no confession, no eyewitness, and no video footage of the crime. The evidence had to speak. Every word, every timestamp, every microscopic particle. Prosecutors began by working with forensic consultants to streamline how the data would be presented to a jury. They knew the strength of their case lay not in one dramatic breakthrough, but in the accumulation of small, independently verifiable truths. A court-ordered second analysis of the soil from the truck's rear wheel wells was conducted at an out-of-state forensic lab to eliminate any perception of bias. The results were identical to the state's findings: trace mineral alignment with the Geneva County burial site at a 98.7% match probability. Not theoretical, not circumstantial, measurable. Gloria's clothing, what remained of it, was resubmitted for fiber comparison under polarized light microscopy. The lab confirmed fiber transfer consistent with the truck interior, specifically the passenger side floor mat in seat fabric. Experts concluded that the level of contact suggested she had been placed or moved while unconscious or deceased. Investigators also requested a forensic mapping of the burial timeline based on insect activity and decomposition progression. The entomologist's findings placed time of death within a 6 to 8 hour window beginning late evening on February 22nd, aligning precisely with the digital silence in Gloria's smart devices and home motion logs. The case file grew to over 500 pages. As the DA's office coordinated with expert witnesses, victim advocacy groups in Alabama began organizing educational panels using the Miller case as a reference point. The focus wasn't on violence, it was on pattern. They discussed how coercive control, non-physical domination of one partner over another, can lead to isolation, compliance, and eventually irreversible outcomes. Gloria had no history of police calls for domestic violence, no public complaints, no restraining orders filed against Stephen. But what she did have was years of gradual withdrawal from her own social circle and digital footprints that shrank noticeably in the months leading up to her death. These patterns were presented to the Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico for a secondary profile review. The team noted a high control risk pairing, a suspect with long-term access, no external criminal history, and a low volatility profile, until one pivot point triggered the collapse of the internal framework. In court, that translates to premeditation, not in the cinematic sense, but in the behavioral one. Not snapping, but deciding, not rage, but resolve. Meanwhile, the defense requested suppression of GPS data, arguing the telematics pull from Stephen's truck violated expectation of privacy. That motion was denied. The system was factory installed and opted in by the user, Stephen himself, under FordPass terms of use. The vehicle's data had been accessed through subpoena with full legal compliance. The trial date was set for August 5, 2025. Jury selection would begin late July. By spring, the community began to adjust to what had happened. But adjust didn't mean forget. You don't forget a case that made you question whether you ever really knew the people down the street. A church volunteer, a retired husband, a house with closed curtains and trimmed hedges. Cases like this don't just test evidence. They test trust. And they remind us that harm doesn't always look like chaos. Sometimes it looks like routine. There are no dramatic final moments in this story. No shocking twist. There is only the truth, compiled one data point at a time, until the silence can no longer protect the person who created it. As of today, June 18, 2025, Stephen Craig Miller Sr. remains in custody. His trial is underway. The outcome will rest in the hands of 12 jurors and the strength of procedural fact. Until then, Gloria's name is no longer a missing person alert. It is part of a system response. A call to identify signs of isolation early, a reason to trust what may feel off, even when everything looks fine from the curb. Because abuse doesn't always look like what you think it should. Injustice, when it arrives, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it builds slowly. One fingerprint, one thread, one unanswered message at a time. What happened to Gloria Miller reminds us that danger doesn't always come loud. It can live in the quiet corners of a home, behind routine smiles and neat appearances. I've learned that silence can be a warning sign too. If you ever feel like something's off, trust that feeling. You don't need bruises to justify protecting your peace. And if you've walked through something similar, know this. Your story matters, and you're not alone. Have you ever ignored a quiet warning because it didn't look serious? What do you think we can do better as a society to recognize those silent red flags? If this video resonated with you, please comment below and let me know where you're watching from, or even just how this story made you feel. And if it didn't connect with you, I'd still love to hear why. Your voice helps shape the stories we share next. Subscribe to this channel if you found this video meaningful. More real-life stories that uncover hard truths and shine a light are on the way.